Okay, everybody, we're about to start. Please take your seats. Okay. Thank you very much. Feels like being back in school or something. Anyway, we have a very interesting panel now with some incredibly knowledgeable and politically powerful guests on the stage and joining online. I'm not sure if we're exactly ready to go. Are we? Yes, we are. So we're going to be talking about the Common Agricultural Policy, which is due to kick off the beginning of next year after, many years of frenzied, fraught negotiations in Brussels. We finally have a CAP reform. It was 2 years delayed, and with me to discuss many different aspects of this new reform, whether it is even a proper reform of the CAP, its environmental aspects, the whole negotiation that's been happening this year with the national capitals over their own plans for using it, are some brilliant speakers. So firstly, joining us online, Harriet Bradley. Give us a little sign if you can hear us, Harriet, just to check that everything's okay. Yes. So Harriet is the head of the CAP and food program at IEEP. So that's a think tank called the Institute for European Environmental Policy. And then directly to my left, Wolfgang Butcher, the Director General of DG Agri, Michael's boss, who was previously sitting in his chair from the European Commission. And then on the furthest side of the stage, Pedro Gallardo, farmer and member of Asaja, which is, pretty much the main farmers organization in Spain. So there we go. And I think, probably Wolfgang, you're the best person to kick us off and just telling us, how close are we in terms of approving these strategic plans? How close are we to actually getting there? And will we do it on time? Will the EU be ready? Will each of the 28 plans, because of course Belgium has 2, be ready come the 1st of January?
Thank you very much, Eddie, and good morning, colleagues. Indeed, it's hugely important that we adopt these strategic plans in time, because farmers are already bringing their semences into the soil, and they still do not exactly know whether they will be remunerated for what. So it's hugely important that we approve, and I think we are on track. We have already approved 9 strategic plans. By the end of this months, probably 5 other member states will introduce their final versions of their strategic plans, and the remaining countries hopefully by mid-October, so that we are quite optimistic that we will be able to approve these programs, these plans in time.
Okay, so it sounds positive, but at the same time, you have had a bit of a back and forth with the countries, haven't you, about certain environmental aspects? Some of them are not going far enough in your view in terms of setting out targets linked to the Green Deal and things like that. Have you had a bit of a tough discussion with some of those countries, or are you just letting everything go through because of the time pressure on you?
I think, Eddie, you have started. It's back to school, and being tough sounds like in school, while this was subject to a quite structured dialogue, which took place more or less 2 years. And I think the judgment whether we have been sufficient demanding towards member states, everybody can make themselves, because we have been very transparent in the process. We have provided by the end of 2020 already recommendations to member states. Member states have then introduced their strategic plans. We have made observations to these strategic plans as to whether we think that the plans of the member states are sufficient addressing the challenges they are facing. And the results of these strategic plans will be published also by the member states. I think what is important to realize is the framework in which this examination of the strategic plans took place. Firstly, evidently, as a rules-based place, we have to do this assessment of what member states submit in compliance with the rules. Secondly, as you point out, it is hugely important that these plans contribute to climate change adaptation and mitigation, but also biodiversity and the environment aspects. contribute and are consistent with the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork objectives. This is what the legal framework reads. But I think, and the discussion you have just had a moment ago, the contribution to environment and climate is not the only objective of this CAP strategic plan. It's also providing food security, income for farmers, and I think that was the difficult choice to make. But to reply to your question, I personally really think that member states and farmers need to make considerable efforts to address the challenges that are part of these new strategic plans, both on the level of the conditionality. I mean, this sounds not very sensational, that you have to make crop rotation, that you should not change grassland, that you should put aside farmland. But if you put aside 4% of farmland of a big farm, this is quite a considerable effort. And just to argue this is part of not doing significant harm to the environment, to my mind, does not reflect the changes that farmers need to do. So conditionality, and then a lot of efforts also in delivering eco-schemes that need to go about the legislative obligations and other environmental measures. So yes, I think we can certainly argue that we contribute to the Green Deal and Farm to Fork targets, and we are consistent with these strategies.
Okay, Harriet, what is IEEP's view of how these talks between Brussels and the member state capitals have been going on? Do you think that I know you think that this reform in and of itself wasn't green enough, the way it was reformed, but do you think that the Commission has managed to save some, to make it greener along the process?
I think obviously it's difficult to say at the moment because we're currently assessing some of the final plans. So obviously we need to wait until those assessments are done. But I would point out, I think, some of the difficulties that I think we've been hearing along the kind of approval process have been to do with some of the flaws in the regulation itself. So I think the fact that there's a lack of clear and quantified objectives has made it quite difficult in some cases for the Commission to really be able to say to the member states, you have to do this or that. And there is a lack of a binding link with the European Green Deal and the biodiversity and farm to fork strategies. So essentially, I think that there aren't enough hooks in the regulation that do allow the Commission to really hold the member states to account. But that being said, it's not like there are no hooks at all. So yeah, we as IEP are conducting some independent assessments of the final plans. And so we're also waiting to reserving judgment until we see the real results.
Okay, I mean, one thing that's been constantly said throughout this year, as I suppose, many other, wow, this is very loud now, that where, a lot of other considerations, the war in Ukraine and the drought that we've had this year, they've all been a lot more at the top of, they've been the headlines, where DG Agri has been quite quietly, working away at on the cap. So I think that's why this makes today's discussion quite good because we can bring it back into the foreground. But one of the messages that we've been hearing is farmers need this certainty. I mean, you said it just now, Wolfgang. But Pedro, maybe you can give us the Spanish view on how much do farmers know about this new CAP? Are they aware of what it really means in terms of change? Are they prepared? Are they ready? Or are they still? I know the Spanish plan is approved now pretty much. So yeah, tell us what's happening in Spain.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Eddie, for the interview, and thank you for Politico for the invitation. Yes, we are very worried because we are starting to sow our fields without a final legislation. We don't know how we will finish the strategic plans. We have our national plan is approved, but we still don't have the final legislation. And of course, this is very difficult because we don't know what to do exactly in our farms, what to produce, more wheat, less wheat, more sunflower, beans. So it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be difficult, and we consider that the global scenario has changed since 2 years ago to now. Our recommendation, our point of view is we should delay this application of the new CEP.
Oh wow! I didn't realize that. Just you, or is it other other parts of other farming groups in other countries as well, or just Asaja?
Another farming organization in Europe consider the same. The scenario has changed. 2 years ago, we don't have a war. 2 years ago, we don't have the input cost so high in our farming. For example, nitrogen is 3 times more expensive than 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we were in streets because our prices of our crops. So, and we have to stop this strike because of the COVID. The global scenario is totally different. And of course, we consider that the Green Deal and biodiversity strategy were communication, and this communication now our government try to push in our strategic plans. And this is something that for farmers, we are going to have a lot of limitation, how to produce. We are going to have also many complex, because it's going to be more complex than before. I always hear, and I'm in farming sector in the last 25 years, always hear that Europe wants to have a simplification of the CEP. Where's the simplification? I don't see the simplification. When we try to have information to the farmers, nobody is understanding right now what we have to do about the eco scheme, about the rotation. We have diversification now of rotation. For example, eco scheme. Now we are going to have to make more greening measure. I have made, for example, multifunctional margins in my farm in last 2 years. The first year I plant in autumn, and more than 20 different varieties of wheats, and it was a bad time for sowing. It should be sowing in spring, so died. The second year I plant in spring, okay, grow. 2 months later, the rabbits eats everything in my margins. So, because of that, we need a transition to the new CEP, and of course, we need to have stability in the farming sector.
Some people would say this CAP is a transition to an even more green CAP, so I suppose it depends which side of the fence you're looking at things from. But I mean, there's no chance, is there, Wolfgang, that this CAP is going to be delayed as Asaja is asking for, is there?
Indeed, as you have said, we have already 2 years transition, in fact, because the new CAP should be in place in principle since 2021. Now it's 2023. But I understand the challenges for farmers. This is why I think our efforts and also the efforts of member states is really, as soon as these plans are published, but even before, we see now many activities of member states to make the information available to farmers. So this is real crucial. But I also think in terms of the new situation that is happening, the CAP strategic plans also offer solutions. The discussion you had a moment before about having less fertilizer available, there is a lot of measures in the eco schemes and agro-environmental measures that provide compensation for farmers to use less fertilizers, in fact, in the context of precision farming. On the point Mr. Gallardo has made, we have also seen these high input costs raising energy and fertilizer, and this is why in the short term the Commission has decided for the first time to use this crisis reserve, which together with the national funding adds up to 1.5 billion euros. So I think our credo is that in the short term we need to be vigilant and attentive regarding the needs of the farmer communities. But as Michael has said a moment ago, and many others of this panel, there is no alternative in the mid and long term to a more sustainable common agricultural policy.
And what about the question that Pedro was talking about in terms of, simplification? Because, if there's one thing which isn't simple, it's the common agricultural policy. I mean, even just in a normal year, without going through a reform, that's partly why a lot of these big organizations like Asaja exist, right? To help farmers, one farmer actually go through all these documents and fill in the right forms and Brussels and everything. Meanwhile, this farmer is, dealing with, their crops and their animals and things like that. So is it more complicated, or is it more simple? Not a simple question.
Happily, I'm not a politician, because if I would be a politician, I would need to say, yes, it's much simpler, this policy. But I think the truth is that in our relation with membership and what the European level does at the level of member states, we really take ourselves back. We have this new delivery model where we look at the performance of member states that they has achieved the policy objective of the common agricultural policy. And we look less as to whether the money spent is in a legal and regular manner. This is left to member states, but still member states need to take care of this at the level of farmers. And here the next question comes in, and I think nobody has a reply to this challenge. The more aid schemes are targeted and focused to deliver results, and this is in particular the case if you would like agro-environmental and agro-ecological measures to be implemented, less nitrate, less pesticides, more animal welfare, you have two solutions. Either to believe that this is occurring on the farm, or you have a reasonable assurance that this is done. But to have this assurance, you need to look at it. Because if you do not look at it, you will be criticized also by society, that you pay money for efforts to contribute to environment and climate, and it is not complied with. So there is no solution. If you are going in what we are demanding, that the common agricultural policy should deliver public goods, you need to check that these public goods are delivered. If society is not happy anymore, if it just pay per hectare a certain amount, which can be easily controlled through GPS and satellites if they want to need more. And I want you on this hectare not to use pesticides. I want you to do this, I want you to do that. Then, by definition, the system becomes more demanding.
Yeah. But I think it's really interesting, and I wanted to bring in Harriet here as well, but I want to just ramble a bit first and see what comes out. But my question will be about the sort of question about, is this a renationalization of the CAP? Because Wolfgang just said, that we've taken a step back. We're now letting the countries come up with their own national plans, and then we will check to see, are they in line with this and that, and how they're performing and things like that. But I'm surprised that the Commission is taking such a backward step in some ways. Maybe not backwards in terms of progress. That's not for me to say, but backwards in terms of, really letting the countries hone their own strategies. I mean, do you think that there's a risk there, Harriet, that maybe there's less alignment, less European policy, and more just 27 different national policies of agriculture pulling in different directions?
Yes, I would say that, definitely. I think one of the issues that we've come up with some of the work that we've been doing looking at the plans is the difficulty of comparing across the member states what they are doing, and also, the lack of the quantified targets in the overall regulation is very hard to assess. How much different member states are contributing to different targets, etc. So I think there is the scope within the strategic planning to have a strategic plan that really addresses the country's needs. But I think when you look at the plans, there are a lot of gaps there, and there's a lot of variation in the quality of the justifications that member states use, for example, of the schemes that they're funding. And there's no requirement to require, that the member states have to justify the schemes that they're funding, with scientific evidence about whether they are effective or not, etc. And if we look at, for example, the indicators that are being used to measure the progress, they're not measuring the actual impacts on things like emissions or soil quality or improvements in biodiversity levels. So I think it is becoming very hard to actually assure a kind of level playing field across the member states with this CAP reform.
But do you one more thing, I mean, because you have been doing sort of analyses of the different strategic plans at IEEP, even though, maybe some of them are not completely finalized yet. But what can you give us some examples of different kinds of environmental ambition or different kinds of eco scheme and different types of eco schemes that maybe Spain has got one, or we have Pedro, so we don't need to talk about Spain, but Italy has this and Poland has that, or are you seeing a very disparate approach? Are some countries being a lot more ambitious than others when it comes, because these eco schemes, it's a significant amount of money, right? I mean, it's a 25%, I think, of the first pillar, which is the largest budget of the CAP. So yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, and I think the eco schemes will be one of the key areas that will really determine whether this CAP performs better on the environment than the previous one. And that will really come down to the quality of those eco schemes. And yeah, at this stage, it's quite hard to say and compare across the countries, but just to give you some flavors, there is some similarity in the eco schemes on some measures. So, for example, there was a big debate about whether or how much member states should oblige there to be space for nature and landscape features on farms in the conditionality. That number was lowered in the conditionality, but most member states are actually offering it in the eco schemes. So there's eco schemes for farmers in most member states to have more space for nature on their farms. So that's one example of where there is some consistency, but broadly speaking, you get quite a wide variation. So, for example, some member states are offering a bit more like the previous CAP greening, if people know that, which is where there's one eco scheme and there's a menu of different options that farmers can choose within them. And the worry there is that there are some options that are not very ambitious or not different from what existing practices are, so those will be the ones that will be chosen. So there you could say that those eco schemes might be less ambitious. Other member states, for example, France, are offering a menu of different options, and then they're offering different levels of payment for different levels of ambition. So there is an incentive for farmers to go for the higher ambition eco schemes in order to get more money. So yeah, and there's other member states like Ireland who are just offering a whole list of different individual schemes with, Poland who are offering lists of individual schemes that farmers can choose from with the same payment levels.
Okay, I like the idea of a French menu, but maybe that's because I'm getting hungry. But Wolfgang, did you want to come in on the question of the why the Commission took such a sort of
Yes, I think this is a passionate topic, in fact. In a globalized and interdependent world, what is the right level of governance decisions? Is it local, regional, national, and European level? And I'm a lawyer, and lawyers are trained in thinking in terms of competencies. But sometimes I think we need also to look at the needs in a new world. And that means that on the one hand, member states are ready to transfer powers to Europe, which has occurred in the context of the COVID crisis. I remember very well constitutional lawyers' discussions that Europe has no role to play in healthcare. Now, what has happened with the COVID crisis? Was it not the right place? So, on the other side, we have also to ask ourselves whether we need to give flexibility and power back to member states if we want to find appropriate solutions. And the starting point for the CAP reform was the so-called SWOT analysis. What are the weaknesses in a given member state? So the replies and the instruments and the funding is very different if you have a nitrate problem like the Dutch and the parts of Germany, which probably take measures and eco schemes in that area, compared to somebody else who has a biodiversity or whatever problem, or a methane emissions problem because he has a big density. So I think it was the right move to let member states decide where they put the money, because we are talking about how you use the 380 billion euros. But, and I come back to the point of Harriet, the European Union does not only act through the common agricultural policy and the strategic plans, but we also act through legislative proposals. And you have seen what happened recently, because the reception of these proposals, if I read the feedbacks, was not so how should I say, enthusiastic.
Yeah.
If you listen about the pesticides, about the emissions,
sure.
about the nature restoration law. But still, Europe also acts at the level of ensuring level playing fields. Maybe we got it wrong, we have to review it. This is the discussion now also at the level with the co-legislators, Parliament and Council. But I think we also take care of these elements. And the last point where I'm really attached, and Harriet referred to it, it was this issue of indicators. I think we have really a huge number of indicators now to judge in this new performance model the outputs.
This is how the Commission and everyone is going to judge whether it's actually working or not.
But I must admit, it's a hugely complex thing, because Harriet was asking for the impact. And the impact at the end is how many butterflies do we have more on a field, how many farm birds are available. But I think the question which we have also to ask ourselves, and it's not about neglecting the responsibility of the agriculture in these areas, but can we ever win this battle in terms of proving that our policy is positive and contributing if the overall conditions in terms of climate change are permanently deteriorating the situation, also because partly of the agriculture. But if I have to measure the number of butterflies, but butterflies are also disappearing because there are many other factors, and the question is always, we put our success on the deliverable of climate, environment, and biodiversity criteria, rightly so, but can we ever deliver positive results? I think that's a question I ask to all of us, because there are many things going on, and this is not telling you that agriculture does not play a key role in this, but there are many other phenomena. And this is why I think it's also important that we define the importance of the common agricultural policy by its contribution to sustainability, rightly so, but also by producing food. Absolutely. Which is a key element of agriculture.
Yeah, and one other aspect that the common agricultural policy is being called upon to contribute more to is more like social equality and social issues. So we have this new conditionality pillar included in the CAP now to make sure that there are fairer rights for workers on farms, and linking up some of the sort of EU workers' rights legislation with the CAP. So we've talked a lot about the environmental aspects of the CAP. We only have 6 minutes left. We've talked a lot this morning in general about food production and the need not to be completely self-sustaining, but we all know why the CAP ultimately exists, and that's to make sure that the food is abundantly available and very cheap in Europe. But also, I mean, Pedro, can you tell us a bit about the social aspect of the common agricultural policy? And when will Spain, for example, implement the red pillar of the CAP? When is that going to come in? Do you know? And how is that going to impact farmers in Asaja?
Well, we consider first that we should make an impact assessment first, because we don't know what could be the result of that. We are talking something very seriously, that is the production of food, not food for Europe. We should also produce for Africa. Africa is going to increase population by 300% in next 80 years by United Nations. And what we don't want is to have Africa hungry like years ago, that we could see people die in Africa because of food. So we are talking about food and feed the world. And like farmers, my priority is to feed the world in a sustainable way. Okay, right. But what we can't do is to have limitation. Limitation, how about in my area, in my farm? Now we're going to lose 4%, 5%, depend of eco-scheme, etc., etc. Then I have a rotation before we have diversification. Now I have to make diversification. Well, we have 1 year derogation because the situation right now, but after that we will have to make a rotation. Why rotation? Maybe one crop is not good for that rotation. I have to make. So I'm going to lose in yields. I'm going to lose production in my farm. I'm going to have a new sustainable directive of medicine of the plant, not a pesticide. I used to say medicine of the plant because we need protection in our crops, and we are losing protection in our crops. If I compare with my competitors in America, in Brazil, Argentina, in Canada, we are losing tools. And we can't continue losing tools if we want to have a predictable farming business.
Sounds like, given your criticism of the way that the CAP is working in the sense that you feel that it imposes a lot of limitations on farmers, you would prefer maybe to do away with the CAP entirely and move to a more maybe American model of, is that what you...
The Farm Bill, for example, the Farm Bill, I think in the future Europe should start to think what is doing our competitors, because maybe we are going to be very green, the greener of the world, but we cannot think only in Europe. We have to be solidarity with another places on the world. We are losing farmers. We are losing farmers because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we have 1 million farmers. Now we have 600,000 farmers in Spain. If we continue like that, we are going to lose farmers. We need digitalization. We need innovation. If we want to young farmer involved in the sector, we need tools. And we need to make attract the sector, not to have limitation. So in this situation, we think that we should make something else. Europe has lost 80% of arable land, 80% in the last 40 years. We can do more with less, right? But we need, for example, new breeding technology. It's the only positive way that we are looking at in the Green Deal, for example. So we can continue doing more with less, but tools. We demand for tools.
Okay, I think it's it's clear there's a huge divergence of of opinion on this panel. But I mean, I do just wonder. Yeah, I do just wonder, given that especially the drought that we saw in Spain. I just wonder whether going for a completely kind of like huge, large-scale farming model where there is like stripped-back regulation, is that really going to address the problems that especially Spain? I mean, Spain is one of the most affected countries already by climate change and drought, and there's a huge need for irrigation and things like that. I mean, how long do you really think that Spain can continue like this? Because there might be no water left in 20 years.
In Spain, we put the example because we have continental farming, we have Mediterranean farming, and also now we have subtropical farming because we produce avocado, we produce mango, we produce kaki. So we want to continue in this diversification in the farming, but for that we need water. The water, and we didn't talk about water. Water is the one of the most important issues that now we have in the south of Europe, not only in Spain, because we have the drought, not only in south of Europe. What we can't understand, like farmer, is like, for example, we have highways for the cars. We have highways for the high-speed train. Now, pipeline from Spain to Italy. And why we don't have a national hydraulic policy about water? Because we are losing water in the north of Spain. And why we can't have a highway for the water from the north to the south? Because when you have water, you have employee, you have wealth, you have more productivity, and you have rural population in the village, in the town.
We're going to live. I think we're moving into a world of pipelines. Everyone's talking about gas pipelines. Ukraine and Poland are building a sunflower oil pipeline. Now we need more water pipelines. So anyway, that's a small thought. We've run out of time. I just want to thank Harriet, Pedro, and Wolfgang. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. We didn't talk only about the sort of pure legislation. I think I'm grateful for that. We also talked about why does the CAP exist and how is it changing and how could it change in the future and should it exist at all? And also we talked about where are we in terms of the policy framework and also how farmers are shaping up to adapt to this new common agricultural policy. So thank you so much to my three panelists for joining me.
Thanks.
We have now a networking break until 11:55. Until 11:55. So yeah, go and network.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.